Alistair Linton, 5th Duke of Wexford, set his palm flat on the open betting book at White's and felt the room go quiet around him. The page was not blank. 3 wagers preceded his, all in the looping hand of Lord Beresford, all for sums no rational man with creditors would put to paper. Alistair lifted the quill, dipped it once, and watched the ink bead on the nib like a single black tear. "You will not write it," Sir Hadrian Vance said from the next chair, his Madeira halted at his mouth. "He will not. Watch him not write it." "He will write it," Lord Justin Reed said. Reed had the smile of a man who had never been told no by a tradesman. "He has been thinking about whether to write it for the entirety of the soup course. Do not interrupt his reverence, Hadrian. He is praying to his own self-restraint." "I am calculating," Alistair said, "the precise sum at which I should be insulted to lose, given that I have no intention of losing." He let the quill touch the page. The first letter of his name was a stroke so confident it scratched paper. 1,000. 1,000? Beresford whistled, low and theatrical. "On what terms, exactly, my friend, since the terms are the whole of the entertainment?" "On these terms." Alistair did not look up. He wrote as he spoke. The clerk standing at the wall did not breathe. "From this evening, the 28th of April, in the year of our Lord 1823, through the close of the London season, the whole of it, I shall attend every event at which Miss Lavinia Marlowe is present. I shall sit beside her at supper when seating permits. I shall stand for at least 1 dance per ball. I shall converse civilly. I shall, in short, place myself in the closest social proximity that a duke may place himself with respect to a young woman of decent family, without being publicly engaged to her." "Decent family," Reed murmured. "He says it like he's being generous." "And what," Beresford said, "do you not do for the 1,000? Alistair set down the quill. The flame of the betting-room candles bent toward the open window. Somewhere outside, a carriage wheel struck a paving stone wrong, and a horse complained. He folded his hands. "I do not call upon her in private. I do not write to her. I do not court her. I do not look at her. And there are 3 witnesses to this clause, gentlemen, who will swear to it in this book if pressed. With anything other than the polite, faintly bored, faintly amused regard which we 4 reserve for the daughters of country gentlemen of whom we know nothing, and for whom we will never feel anything. If I break any of those 4, I lose. If I sustain all 4 through the last ball of June, I win. £1,000 from each of you, settled at Almack's, 2 days after the Queen's drawing room closes the season." "You are mad," Hadrian said, not unkindly. "She is the loveliest creature to enter this town in 3 years. Lady Hester would not have brought her if she were not. Every man between the ages of 19 and 40 will be at her elbow within a fortnight." "Which is the point of the wager, Hadrian?" Alistair signed his name. He blotted it. He closed the book. "I cannot demonstrate restraint where there is nothing to restrain. I require a subject. The lovelier she is, the more decisive the demonstration." "Demonstration to whom?" Beresford was watching him with the curiosity he usually reserved for promising horses. "We have been your friends since we were boys, Alistair. We have already accepted that you are made of granite. To whom are you proving anything?" The Duke pulled on his gloves. They were grey kid, very fine, and he tugged each finger to its full length with the air of a man who would shortly leave a place he did not particularly enjoy. "To myself," he said. He did not smile. "I have grown bored of being told I am incapable of feeling. I shall therefore set the trap as exhaustively as a man can set it. If I do not fall, which I shall not, I shall have proved the matter for good. If I do fall, which I shall not, I shall pay you each £1,000 and marry her in St. James's at the end of June, and we shall consider it a course of moral education for which I was very expensively prepared. Good evening, gentlemen." He went out into the soft April wet of the street. The lamps were just coming up. He had told them only 3 of the 4 reasons he wrote in that book, and only 2 of those reasons were true. The 4th reason, the unspoken one, the one he had not even framed in his own private interior, but which was operating in his chest the entire time he had been writing, was a small image he had carried since the previous evening at his mother's drawing room. His mother had been describing, in the slow, oblique way she described matters of consequence, the arrival in town of one Miss Lavinia Marlowe, a goddaughter of Hester Pembroke's, brought down from Kent for what was generally being represented as a season, but appeared, on closer inquiry, to be a season under unusual conditions. Hester did not bring out young women. Hester had not brought out a young woman in 22 years. Hester also did not give small dinners for 4 bachelors at a time without a purpose. And the Dowager had 3 theories about what Hester's purpose might be, and the third of the 3 had made the Duke set down his glass. He had walked from his mother's house in Berkeley Square to White's that evening through Hyde Park rather than along Piccadilly. It was a longer route by 10 minutes. The gravel had been wet under his boots. He had passed a charwoman, lighting the area railings of a house in Park Lane, and had nodded to her as he went by. He had thought, on that gravel, about 3 matters in sequence. About his father's last evening at Brooks's 22 years ago. About the entry in the betting book at Brooks's, which his father had signed 2 days before. And about the precise quality of his own self-restraint, which had been the only inheritance his mother had wanted him to have. He had arrived at White's at 20 minutes past 9. He had eaten his soup. He had heard Beresford make a remark in the smoking room about a young woman lately arrived from Kent. He had decided, in the space of 1 breath, what he was about to do. He had walked into the betting room. The rest, he had let his hand do. He turned out of St. James's into Pall Mall and put his shoulder into the rain. He did not particularly know what he was about to do for the rest of the spring. He had a wager in a book. He had an arrangement with himself, which he had only half acknowledged. He had a small, hot, idiot certainty that he was walking, that evening, in the opposite direction from the country gentleman's daughter who would change the conditions of the rest of his life, and that the next time he walked from this street, he would not be walking, on any errand, anywhere, alone. He told himself he was being theatrical. He told himself nothing of consequence could occur in 14 days. He told himself many other things in the 400 yards between Pall Mall and his own door, all of which would prove, by the 2nd Saturday in May, to have been beautifully and exhaustively wrong. Lavinia Marlowe was on the 2nd-floor landing of her godmother's house in Bruton Street when the letter arrived. She knew it was the letter the instant the footman climbed the stair toward her with the salver. He had the wrong face. He had the face servants wore when they were carrying news up to women who would be expected not to weep at it in front of other servants. "From Honfleur, miss," the footman said. He held the salver out at the precise height that suggested he too would prefer to be elsewhere. "Thank you, Hobbs." She took the letter. The seal was her brother's, a half-fox, jumping, in a brown wax that had once been red. He had kept the same fox since he was 11. The poor and the proud both kept their seals long after the wax had aged. "I am not at home to callers this morning. Tell my godmother I am reading." "Yes, miss." She did not move from the landing. She did not particularly want to be alone in the morning room with this letter, where a fire was already going and a tea tray already laid, because the tea would go cold while she read it, and she would forget that. And that small forgetting would make a maid feel awkward, and she had grown unable to bear the awkwardness of servants on her behalf. She broke the seal on the landing. She read the letter standing. "Lavinia," it ran, in the slanted writing she had learned to read before she could read print. "The boat from the Havre is full of Englishmen who refuse to look at one another in case they recognize. I have taken a room above a chandler. The wallpaper is a color I would not have chosen in my old life, but the food is hot, and the woman who cooks it has the manner of an aunt. I sleep at night now. You will say I have written this twice, and you will be right, but the second time it is more true than the first. You are not to do anything foolish. I am writing because I will worry less if I have told you not to do it. Hester will give you a season. She is rich enough to give 2 and stubborn enough to give 3. Let her give you 1. Dance with all of them. Be looked at. Let the looking be the thing you do. Do not, Lavinia, do not look for the man who took everything from us. He is one of 3. He may be all 3. He may be none. He may be a 4th I never named. I know which of them I think it is. I will not write you the name, because if you read it on paper you will go and find him in his own house, in your blue cloak, and you will say something I cannot undo from Honfleur. Be at peace this season. Let me have your peace. I will earn enough to come home in 2 years, and you will be married by then, and the matter will rest. Your loving and shamed brother, Thomas. She read the letter twice on the landing. Then she folded it into its own creases, neat work like a fan, and slid it inside the bodice of her morning dress, against her chest, where she would feel its corners through the muslin all day. She went down the stairs without hurry. In the doorway of the morning room, her godmother was already turned to look at her with the wary, fierce, watchful regard that meant a letter from Honfleur had been expected, and was now an inconvenience. He has written to tell me to do nothing. Lavinia took the chair at the fire. She did not touch the tea. He has written to tell me to dance with all of them, and that the looking be the thing I do. Good. Lady Hester Pembroke, Dowager Countess of Surrey, was 63 years old that spring, and looked like a falcon with the bones of a much smaller bird. She wore lavender silk before noon. She had buried 2 husbands, and the second one twice. Once in the church, and once, 3 years later, in the public memory after his bequests had been read. He is right. You will do exactly as he says. You will dance. You will allow yourself to be looked at. You will, in addition, attend my small dinner the night after tomorrow, at which I have invited Lord Beresford and Sir Hadrian Vance and Lord Justin Reed and the Duke of Wexford, and you will sit beside the Duke, because that is where I have placed you, and you will be charming. Lavinia raised her eyes from the fire. Godmother? Yes, child. Those 4 names. Yes. 3 of those 4 were at Brooks's the night Thomas... Yes. Lady Hester picked up her tea. She drank it without looking at her goddaughter. It is why I invited them. It is also why I invited the Duke. 3 of them were there, and one of them, Wexford, was not. And the absence interests me as much as the presence. 3 of them played, and one of them is the only man in London who has never set foot in Brooks's, which strikes me as either the most virtuous abstinence in the West End, or the most useful. We are going to determine which. We. Hester set down her cup. You did not come to me to dance, child. I know that. I knew it when you wrote me from Kent in February and asked, in a letter that contained no questions about gowns, whether I would have you. You came to find out which of 3 men ruined your brother. I am 63. I have nothing left to do that is amusing. I am going to help you, and we are going to do it without your brother knowing. And we are going to do it by being seen with the 4 of them so often that one of them slips. Drink your tea. Lavinia did not move toward the tea. She looked at her godmother and felt, for the first time since the boat had pushed off from Dover with her brother on it 3 months ago, a sensation she could not at once name. A tightening, as if a strap inside her chest had finally found its buckle. They will think we are husband hunting. Wonderful. Hester's mouth curved. She lifted her cup again. Let them. Husband hunters are never suspected of anything else. The small dinner at Lady Hester's was for 10, which, in Bruton Street, meant the dining room was so full of candlelight that one could not at first see the figures of one's neighbours, only their bright spots, a sleeve, a buckle, a shoulder, a face. Lavinia took her seat at the Duke's right, and did not look at him for a full minute. She had decided in the carriage, on the way down from her room, that she would not look at him until she had heard him speak twice. Hester had told her, very calmly, that he was the most reserved man in England, and that his face, when one finally saw it, would do half her work for her, if she could only delay the first sight. He spoke, however, after only 30 seconds. He said, to her in particular, and not to the room, "Miss Marlowe, I am told by your godmother that I am to be charmed by you this evening. I shall do my best to bear up." She did look at him then. He was looking straight ahead at his soup. His profile was unkind to him in the candlelight, sharp at the jaw, the brow shadowed, the mouth a line. The width of his shoulders inside the dark coat was such that the chair seemed to be his, rather than the house's. His hand on the spoon was broader than she had pictured. The knuckle of the index finger had been broken once, badly, and set well. There was a scholar's ink stain at the cuff of his shirt. Blue. "My godmother told me," Lavinia said, "that you were the most reserved man in England, and that I was not to take it personally if you did not speak." "Then she has lied to you," Wexford said. "I have just spoken twice. You should now distrust her on every other particular." "On every particular except the seating arrangement," Lavinia said. "That she got exactly right." He looked at her. The candle behind her shoulder threw light into his eyes for the first time, and she found them grey. Not the cool grey she had been bracing for, but the grey of slate in rain, with the green showing where it had been wet. He held the look for as long as a polite man would hold it at a dinner table on a first acquaintance. Then he set down his spoon. "You are not what I was led to expect," he said. "Should I apologize?" "Not in the least. I'm very tired of what I am led to expect. What did your godmother tell you about the gentleman on the other side of the table?" Lavinia did not turn her head. She had memorized them in the drawing room before they came in. Beresford, on Lady Hester's right, blonde and beautifully arranged, the kind of man whose tailor had a religious purpose. Vance, opposite, with a sword scar across the bridge of his nose he had received at 21 in Belgium, and never grown out of being proud of. Reed, at the far end, smiling at every woman in turn, as if he had a list and was working through it. "She told me," Lavinia said, "that Lord Beresford has the best seat on a horse of any man in town. That Sir Hadrian was nearly cut down at Waterloo and considers the matter unfinished. That Lord Justin will marry money this year and is being patient about it. She did not, however, tell me what any of them did the 3rd week of January." The Duke had begun on his fish. He did not stop. He did not look up. The fork went into the flesh, came out, lifted, and entered his mouth, with the unhurried, drilled grace of a man whose entire body had been trained never to flinch. He finished the bite. He laid the fork down. He turned to look at her with no expression at all. "The 3rd week of January," he said. "The 3rd week of January. That is," he did the small mathematic at the front of his mind, "a very particular request, Miss Marlowe." "It is. And what occurred in the 3rd week of January that you suppose I might tell you, when you and I have known each other for the duration of one bowl of soup?" "I should not have supposed you would tell me," Lavinia said. "I supposed only that you might know." He was silent for 2 breaths. Down at the other end of the table, Lady Hester was laughing at something Sir Hadrian had said. Reed was raising a glass. Beresford was watching the Duke and his goddaughter from beneath very pale eyelashes and pretending not to. "Miss Marlowe?" Wexford spoke at a lower pitch, not whispered, but pitched downward so the table would not catch it. "I would prefer that you did not ask me again in front of company. I shall tell you what I know, but not at this table, and not in this room, and not in a manner that compromises you. I shall," he glanced toward Lady Hester, "call upon your godmother in 3 days, on a matter of subscription to a hospital in which she has an interest. You will happen to be in her morning room. I shall arrive at 11. I assume your godmother will have engineered the rest. Do you object?" She had not, in the carriage, prepared for this. She had prepared for a duke who would refuse her, or insult her, or laugh, and had a face for each of the three. She had not prepared for a duke who would do the work himself before being asked. Her hand on her wineglass tightened, so the stem creaked once against her ring. "I do not object." "Then we shall proceed." He picked up his fork. "Do not, however, ask me one more question this evening. I've just spoken 3 more sentences to you than I've spoken to any unmarried woman in 11 months, and I'm beginning to alarm myself." She laughed before she had decided to. It was a small laugh, more breath than voice, and his profile shifted half a degree toward her at the sound of it, and his mouth did a thing it had not done all evening. Corners up, very briefly, and then closed again at once before anyone else in the room could read it. 3 seats down, Lord Beresford raised his glass in their general direction. His smile was the smile of a man who had begun to keep score. The Duke arrived at Lady Hester's morning room on a Tuesday at 3 minutes to 11, which is the time at which gentlemen who do not wish to keep an appointment arrive at it. He gave his hat to Hobbs. He gave his card. He went into the room without his greatcoat, because the spring had turned in 3 days from cold to warm, and Bruton Street smelled like wet grass for the first time that year. Lady Hester was conveniently absent. She had taken her woman and gone to look at a bonnet 2 streets over, in such a way that 2 streets meant exactly far enough to be unable to chaperone for 1 hour, and her absence had been engineered with such a thinness of pretense that even Hobbs, when he showed the Duke in, had looked at the empty drawing-room chair with a particular small lift of the eyebrow that suggested his employer had not always required this much engineering from him. Lavinia was at the window with a sheaf of papers. The papers were the household accounts. She was holding them in the way one holds papers one is not actually reading. One finger had been on the same line for some minutes. She turned at the sound of his step. "Your Grace." "Miss Marlowe, sit, if you would. I shall not stay long." He did not sit. He went to the fire and turned his back to it, the way countrymen do, palms behind him, taking the heat into the small of his back. "I had to choose, between Saturday and now, whether I would come at all. I have decided that I will. I shall tell you what I know about the 3rd week of January. I shall tell it once. You will not write it down. You will not repeat it in this house or any other. You will, after I have told it, sit very still and consider what you mean to do with it. And you will not do anything until you have spoken to me again. Are those terms acceptable?" She set down the papers. "They are." "Very well." The Duke looked into the fire over his own shoulder for a moment, then back at her. The slate grey was very still. "On the night of Thursday the 17th of January, in a private room at Brooks's Club, your brother lost £28,000 to 3 gentlemen. I was not present. I do not gamble at Brooks's. I do not gamble at all, except in matters where I am the only stake. I do, however, have a man, a very quiet, very well-paid man, whose business it is to know who lost what to whom on every night of the calendar. By Friday morning, I had the names of the 3. By Saturday, I had a copy of the scorebook. By the following Wednesday, I had the deposition of the steward who served the room, and had heard certain phrases used while the play was in progress." He paused. He looked at his boots. "Your brother was cheated, Miss Marlowe. He was cheated by a system that had been worked between 2 of those 3 gentlemen since the November previous. The 3rd did not know. The 3rd lost a small amount of his own at the same table to keep up appearances. I do not know which 3rd. The deposition of the steward names 2. The 3rd is implied, but not named. I have been sitting on this information since the 3rd of February, in the hope that one of the 3 would do something stupid enough to make the matter public, without my having to bring it forward, because I do not relish being the man who turns king's evidence on his own friends. I have not, in 3 months, seen the stupidity I require. That is what I know." She did not move. Her hand was at the corner of the chair back, gripping it. She had not been aware of going to the chair back. The fox of her brother's seal pressed its bent shape against her sternum through the fold of her bodice. "Why?" she said. "Why what?" Why did you have a man whose business it is to know who lost what to whom? The Duke looked at her properly then. The grey was very steady. Because my father, when he was a younger man than I am now, also lost a great deal of money to 3 friends in a private room. He did not survive what came after the loss. I have known, since I was 13, that men do this to each other, and that the only protection a man like me has is to know which men, and to know early. I do not enjoy the work. I have nevertheless done it. She sat. She had not realized she had been on her feet. She sat in the chair the Duke had told her to sit in some minutes ago. He watched her sit. He did not move from the fire. "You will not," she said. "Tell me their names." "I will not. Not yet. Not because I do not trust you. Because you do not yet know what you would do with them. You believe you do. You do not. When you do, I shall tell you. On the morning of the day you have decided to act. Not before." "That is very arrogant of you." "It is. I have been told so all my life. It is also correct." She wanted to be angry with him for that. She found that she could not quite manage it. The information he had given her, even without names, was more than she had had at any moment since Thomas had come into her father's library in late January, with his face white and his cravat already loosened. The Duke had done a thing she had not asked him to do, and could not have asked him to do, because she had not, until that minute, known to ask. She put her hand to her bodice and pressed her brother's letter flat against her ribs, as though to confirm it was still there. "Your Grace." "Yes?" "Why are you telling me any of this?" The Duke looked into the fire. He looked into it long enough that the spring light from the window changed the shadow under his jaw twice. "Because," he said, "I have made an unwise wager with 3 men, one of whom is one of your 3. I shall not tell you which. I shall not tell you the terms. The wager is not, I now find, a thing I shall sustain unless I can sustain it without harming you. I shall therefore sustain it in your direction, by harming you as little as I am able. Which means giving you, without your asking, what I have, today, so that whatever follows between us this season is at least built on this much truth, and not on less. Good morning, Miss Marlowe. I shall see you on Friday at the Pembroke Ball, where I shall stand for one dance, and from which I shall otherwise keep my distance. Do not look for more than that. I am, in many respects, exactly the man your godmother described. Only, the seating arrangement was correct." He went out before she had assembled the question. She heard Hobbs in the hall. She heard the door. She heard a carriage that was not his start up in the next street. The fire popped. It was 3 full minutes before she discovered that she was, for the first time in 3 months, smiling. Hyde Park, at the fashionable hour on the following Wednesday, was a slow river of horses and barouches under a sky which the season was unwilling to commit to. The cherry on the long avenue was open at the tip, closed in the leaf, in the precise state of half-decision which described the entire month of May in London. Lavinia rode behind her godmother, on a quiet bay her godmother had borrowed for her from a cousin, and arranged her face for the work of the afternoon. The work was simple. She was to ride at the Duke's elbow for as much of the hour as he permitted. She was to allow Lord Beresford to ride at hers, on the other side, whenever Beresford chose to do so. She was to converse with Sir Hadrian and Lord Justin Reed as they passed, and as they overtook, without preference. She was to watch which of the 3 could be made to refer, in even the smallest aside, to the 3rd week of January. She was, throughout this, to give every appearance of a young woman in her first season, who was happy to be looked at, and being looked at by everyone. She rode well. Her father had put her on horses at 6. She knew, without thinking about it, how to take a rein in 2 fingers and let her seat do the rest. She knew, also, how to lift her chin precisely enough that the cherry blossom showed against her dark auburn hair without seeming to be staged. She had, at one moment, the strong sensation of being in costume for a play, in which she was the only player who knew the lines. Beresford arrived first. He drew up on a chestnut, nearly as gold as his hair. He had the seat Lady Hester had promised, and he knew it. His coat was the colour of weak tea, and very plain, which on him meant very expensive. "Miss Marlowe, you ride." "I do, Lord Beresford." "Hester did not warn us." "She does not warn anyone of anything as a matter of policy." "Then I am about to be schooled by your bay before the avenue is out." "You will not. He is a coward. He has been told there are biscuits at the end of this, and he will not gallop until he has had them." Beresford laughed. He had a real laugh, surprisingly low for so blonde a face, and the laugh was the first thing about him that she could imagine liking. He fell in at her left. The Duke had not yet appeared. She knew where he was. She could feel him 3 lengths behind her, on a horse she had heard pass somewhere near the gate, and she set her shoulders into the not turning toward him with the discipline of a woman who has decided to be looked at only when she has decided. "Miss Marlowe," Beresford said, "forgive a forward question. Did Wexford speak to you at Hester's dinner?" "He did." "For long?" "Long enough." "He has spoken to no woman for longer than 3 sentences in 7 years. I am being instructive, not impertinent. I have known him since he was 9. He chose me, in our first term at school, by walking up to me on the cricket green and informing me that I bowled with my elbow bent and would never take a wicket above a club level. He was correct. I have loved him ever since for the freedom of being told." "And you tell me this," Lavinia said, "because I should like you to be aware," Beresford said, "that he is the rarest sort of man in London. He has no public vice. He is presently the chairman of 3 subscription societies. He attends Sunday services in Berkeley Square at 8 in the morning, so as not to be looked at by anyone who matters. He pays his tradesmen in the same week he employs them. He is, in short, what I should call, without irony, a good man. And good men, Miss Marlowe, when they begin to feel a thing, are slower to recover from it than the rest of us." She turned her face to him then, not too quickly. "And why, Lord Beresford, would you tell a young woman of 14 days' acquaintance that the Duke of Wexford is slow to recover from feelings he is unlikely to develop?" He met her eye. He was, she allowed herself the thought, professionally, like a buyer at a horse fair, handsome. The blue of his eyes was pale and very direct, and not unfriendly. "Because there is a wager in the book at White's," he said, "and I would prefer that you, of the 2 parties, were not the one who lost it." She did not let her face change. She kept her hands soft on the rein. She watched her bay's ears. "There is a wager." "There is." "On me. In a manner of speaking, not against you. Around you." "And the terms?" "The terms are that the Duke shall sit at your elbow at every event of the season, dance with you, sup beside you, converse with you, while caring for you precisely as much as he cares for any other young woman of decent family, which is to say, not at all. £1,000 from each of us if he sustains it, 1,000 to him from each of us. He proposed the terms. He wrote them in the book. He has, so far, conducted himself precisely as agreed." Lavinia's bay set down its hoof on a paving stone and stumbled. She steadied it without effort. She did not look at Beresford. She looked along the avenue, at the cherries, opening at the tip and closing in the leaf, and she allowed herself one careful breath. "And you are telling me this," she said, "because you wish me to do what, Lord Beresford?" "I wish you," Beresford said, "to know what you are inside. I do not wish you to lose your reputation while 4 men play. I am the eldest in this group of 4 by 10 months. I have been a poor friend to better people than you in my time. I am attempting on this one occasion to be a better one." She turned her bay then. She let it walk on. She felt, rather than saw, the Duke draw level with them a moment later, on a horse that did not stumble on paving stones, and she set her gloved hand on her rein, and did not, for fully 100 yards, look at either of them. "Miss Marlowe," the Duke said. Your Grace, I trust your godmother is well. She is at home. She is reading a book of sermons because she has decided that sermons amuse her this week. Then I shall arrange to send her an additional volume. She will read it. She reads anything sent by a duke. She says it is the cheapest education of her old age. He did not laugh. He never quite laughed. The corner of his mouth did the thing it had done at the dinner table, briefly, and then closed. Beresford fell back 2 lengths, the way men do when they have completed a duty they are not proud of, and Lavinia rode on at the Duke's elbow, under a sky that had not yet committed to anything, with a piece of information sitting in her chest beside her brother's letter, and a decision already forming, which she did not yet have the words for, but which had to do with a wager and a fortnight, and a man who had given her the truth about her brother, on the same morning he had agreed in writing to feel nothing. She did not, for the next 50 yards, trust herself to speak. The Duke did not require her to. He rode beside her in his perfectly even seat, and did not, by the smallest motion of his shoulders, ask anything of her at all. It was, she discovered, the first thing about him that frightened her. She had grown up, in her father's untidy Kentish library, on a particular kind of reading. Her father had been a man of mathematical interests and erratic temper, and the books he had owned ran in 2 streams: the long arithmetical correspondences of his European colleagues, in 3 languages, none of which Lavinia could read with full fluency, and the small green volumes of the previous century's moralists, which he had inherited from his own father and had never opened, and which Lavinia had opened by the dozen in the long afternoons of her 16th and 17th years. From those volumes, she had learned the names of all the human postures it was possible to assume in front of another person, the postures of supplication, of contempt, of restraint, of indifference, of self-conscious modesty, of feigned forgetfulness. And she had learned to recognize, on the faces of those around her, the small mechanical adjustments by which an interior was made to declare an exterior. It was an unkind education for a country gentleman's daughter. It had been, in the present spring, the only useful one. She rode that afternoon at the Duke's elbow, with her face arranged for the work. She did not, at any moment in the next 50 yards, alter the muscles of her cheek. She did not turn her head. She let her bay walk on at his bay's measure, and she listened, with the surface of her attention, to the orchestra of small noises which made up a Hyde Park afternoon at the fashionable hour. The rasp of gravel, the churring of a bird in the chestnut on her right, the sharp small bell of a handcart in the distance, the lift of a parasol, 2 ladies in front, the laugh of a child who had escaped its governess in the long grass beside the rail. Beneath all of these, she heard, very precisely, the breathing of the man riding beside her, which was even, which was unhurried, which was, she made herself note this, the breathing of a man who had not allowed himself, in the 4 minutes since he had drawn level with her, to look once at her profile. She did, in the same 4 minutes, 2 interior arithmetics simultaneously. The first was, she had been told a wager existed. The second was, the wager could not survive an evening like this, without one of its parties altering, and the only party with anything to lose, on the present accounting, was herself. She had to decide, before she next dismounted, whether she wished to be the party who altered the arrangement first. She did not, on that 50 yards, decide. She rode on. She watched the cherry on the avenue showing its pink at the tip and its hard, small leaves below. She felt, in the soft of her glove, the wet of her own palm, where she had been gripping the rein, and she relaxed her fingers one by one along its length, until the bay's mouth was again at the precise weight she had taught it to wear. She did not, at any visible point, give the 4 men who were now riding in a long, irregular formation behind her any reason to suppose that she had begun, on her own account, and without telling any of them, to keep her own betting book in the interior of her chest. The Pembroke ball was on the Friday following, and was the 3rd ball of the season, and was the precise sort of event at which a young woman with her godmother's connections was expected to be seen. Lavinia wore an emerald silk gown. Hester had ordered it without consulting her, in a colour Lavinia would not have chosen, with a low square neck cut at the precise depth which announced that the wearer was a goddaughter of Lady Hester's, and would not be giggled at by any other young woman in the room. The fox letter was folded in a little reticule on her wrist. She had not, since Hyde Park, taken it out of her direct possession. Wexford came across the room to her, exactly at the appointed moment in the third set. He had spent the first 2 sets standing at the perimeter with a glass of something he was not drinking. He had been spoken to by 2 dowagers, both of whom he had answered courteously and at length, and by Sir Hadrian Vance, with whom he had exchanged no more than 2 sentences. Lavinia had counted. She was, this evening, counting many things. He bowed. "Miss Marlowe, I believe this is mine." "It is, Your Grace." He led her into the set. He was, she discovered, a competent dancer who took no pleasure in dancing. He moved her through the figures with the same drilled neutrality with which he had eaten his soup. His glove was warm against hers at the turn. His hand at her waist on the second figure was placed precisely where a gentleman's hand was placed, and not 1/4 of an inch further inward. "You are very correct. I am very correct. It is exhausting to watch. I have been told." "By whom?" "By a man who told me on Wednesday in Hyde Park what the precise terms of his wager with me were. I am told he had a longer conversation with you at the same time." She missed the next step. He caught her. There is a way a competent dancer catches a missed step which appears to be a deliberate flourish, and he used it. He held her hand a beat longer through the recovery than the figure required. "You knew he would tell me." "I assumed it." The Duke's voice was at her ear, and at no other. "I have known him since we were 9 years old. He is a better man than he forgives himself for being. He would not have agreed to the wager if he had not, at some level, intended to lose it for me. He has told you in the 2nd week so that I may not last to the 3rd. That is his arithmetic." "Why," she said, "would he do that?" The Duke turned her under his arm. The candlelight from the chandelier above them caught his hair, and made the dark of it browner than it had looked at her godmother's table. "Because he is, of the 4 of us, the one who knows what it costs to win this particular wager." "And what does it cost?" "It costs," the Duke said, "the man who wins it, which is why I shall not win it, although neither shall I lose it. Step right, the figure goes there." She stepped right. She did not look at his face. She looked at the line of his coat at the shoulder, and at the place where the white of his cravat met the dark line of the lapel. And she said, into the place between them, where the candle noise and the orchestra and the talking made it possible to say a thing that would not be overheard, "You have told me, without my asking, about my brother. You have told me, without my asking, about the wager. I have not asked you for either. I should like to know, Your Grace, what you intend to tell me, without my asking, in the next fortnight, that I shall similarly have no recourse against." He missed the next step. It was very small. A man watching from the perimeter would not have seen it. She felt it through her gloved fingers where his hand was at hers. The smallest catch, the smallest correction. "I intend," he said, "to tell you, on a particular evening that I shall recognize when I come to it, why my father did not survive what he lost at Brooks's. I shall not tell you tonight. I should prefer that you not ask me to. I do not, between now and that evening, intend to tell you anything else that you have not asked me to. I have grown alarmed at the volume of unsolicited candor you have lately drawn from me, Miss Marlowe. It is not characteristic. Should I apologize?" "You should not. You should, instead, continue to dance. The figure is about to end. We shall step into the line. I shall bow to you. You shall curtsy. I shall withdraw to the perimeter, where I shall not, by the smallest motion, give the 4 men I have so far counted observing us, 3 of whom are friends of mine, and 1 of whom is a friend of Lady Hester's, any reason to suppose that the next 18 seconds altered anything between us. Are you prepared, Miss Marlowe?" "I am prepared." The figure ended. He bowed. She curtsied. He withdrew. She stood on the line and watched him go. She watched him take up his position on the perimeter and accept a fresh glass from a footman and incline his head, with grave indifference, towards Sir Hadrian Vance, who had been observing them from the other side of the room, with a look she was now able to identify as a man counting days. 6 days. The fortnight had 8 to go. The bookshop in Piccadilly was, Hester said, the only one in London at which one could be guaranteed not to encounter anyone whose conversation one would regret. Hester had taken to her bed with what she called the spring vapours, which were, in practice, the exhaustion of a 63-year-old woman who had attended a ball, a breakfast, and a literary morning in 3 consecutive 24-hour periods, and had sent Lavinia out with only her maid and her godmother's coachman, and the explicit instruction to walk in Piccadilly, look bored, and let the bookshop know we are still alive. Lavinia stood at the window of Hatchard's the following Tuesday, with her gloved finger on the spine of a volume of Hume's essays, and was reaching for a slimmer book of poems beside it, when the Duke's voice, behind her left ear, and at the same low pitch he had used at the dinner table, said, "Hume is the wrong book." She did not start. She had heard him come in. She had heard him give his hat to a clerk. Her ears were now arranged to him, which was a fact she would have to deal with later, and she had registered the cadence of his step on the wood floor before he was within 2 yards of her. She did not, however, turn until she had finished closing the volume of Hume. "Your Grace." "Miss Marlowe." He bowed his head, just enough that the clerk at the desk could record the courtesy and forget the rest. "Hume is the wrong book, because he will tell you that everything you believe about your brother's situation could be coherent without a single fact you have presently in evidence. And you do not, at this point in the matter, need to hear that." "You are eavesdropping on my reading." "I am reading your shelf. I have been reading your shelf for 40 seconds, which is the duration of time you have spent at it." "And what is the right book, Your Grace?" He reached past her, not touching her, but close enough that the wool of his sleeve passed within an inch of her shoulder, and she felt the heat of the cloth against the bare skin above her elbow, and pulled, from 2 shelves up, a slim volume bound in green leather. He set it on the table. "This." She lifted it. Maria Edgeworth, Tales of Fashionable Life. She had read it at 15. "This is a children's book." "It is not. It is, among other things, a book in which a young woman of decent family who has been brought to town for a season is the subject of a wager between 4 men, 3 of whom are dishonorable, 1 of whom is not. She is not informed of the wager. She is informed only at the close of the season, by which time she has already determined the matter for herself, in a manner which exposes the 3 and elevates the 1, none of whom she has at any point asked to declare himself. I read it at 14. I have not since read a book which has more to say about the precise situation in which I now find myself. I commend it to your attention." She had her hand at the green leather. She did not, for a long moment, lift her eyes. "Your Grace." "Yes." "Are you telling me that you intend to be the one who is elevated?" "I am telling you," the Duke said, very quietly, "that I do not intend it. I have made every arrangement of my life over the past 3 years on the assumption that I should not be capable of being elevated by anything. I do not seek the elevation. I do not, however, any longer trust myself to refuse it, if you should be the agent of it. Buy the book, Miss Marlowe. Read it tonight. I shall not call upon you tomorrow." He did not look at her again. He did not bow. He walked the length of the shop and out of it without putting on his hat, which the clerk, who had observed the entire exchange and would dine out on it for a year, handed back to him at the door with the smallest possible smile. Lavinia stood at the table with the green book in her hand. The shop bell rang as he went out. She did not move toward the counter for some minutes. She did not, in fact, move until her maid, who had been pretending to look at almanacs at a respectful distance, came at her elbow and said, "Miss?" in the soft voice maids use to remind their mistresses that other people in the room are now looking at them. She bought the book. She paid for it herself, from the small allowance Hester had given her for the spring, because she did not, at that moment, wish to be the kind of young woman who was given Maria Edgeworth by a duke. She carried it home and read it that night in the chair beside her bedroom fire. She read it once through. She read certain pages a second time. At 1 in the morning, she set the book on the small table beside the candle and went and stood at the window and looked at the lamps of Bruton Street, and did not for some minutes cry, because she had not yet decided that the situation warranted it. She decided instead that on the morning following, she would call upon her godmother in the morning room and would tell her, very calmly, that she had now identified one of the three. She did not yet, on the morning following, know which one. She knew by the evening of that same day. The morning came in slowly through the muslin at her bedroom window, in a colour that was not quite blue. She heard, from the back of the house, the milk cart at the area railing, and the brief, unintelligible exchange between the boy on the cart and Hester's kitchen maid, neither of whom had been awake long enough to be civil. She heard, somewhere on the upper landing, a maid laying coals against a grate which would not, today, require a fire. She heard, in herself, the steady working of a particular line of thought, which had not been there when she went to bed, and which had arrived, fully shaped, while she had been asleep. She had been reading Maria Edgeworth, past 1. She had read certain pages a second time, then a third. She had set the book on the table beside the candle and gone to the window. She had stood at the window for some minutes, and she had cried. She would, at a later date, admit that she had cried. For a length of time, and with a quantity of grief which had surprised her, because the grief had not been about her brother. The grief had been about herself. She had decided, in a single quarter hour at her bedroom window, with a Maria Edgeworth volume on the table behind her, that she was no longer the young woman who had walked into Hester's morning room 3 weeks earlier, with a fox seal letter in her bodice and a single useful project, and that she was, instead, a young woman who had now 2 projects, and that the second project, the one which had begun in a bookshop in Piccadilly, at the moment a man 2 shelves up had reached past her shoulder without touching her, was the one which would, by the end of the season, be the more dangerous. She had gone to bed at 1:30. She had slept, against her own expectation, for 6 full hours. She had not dreamed. In the morning, she went down to her godmother's morning room at 9:15. She sat at the window. She drank the chocolate. She did not, all morning, mention the Duke. She mentioned only that she had, by means of her reading of a particular author the night before, decided that one of the 3 was a fool, and that fools could be set aside for the moment, and that the other 2 were the matter at hand. Hester had received this report with a face arranged so studiously not to register satisfaction that Lavinia had known, by the second minute of the report, that her godmother had been waiting to receive it from her for some weeks. They had then turned the conversation to the question of which musical evenings of the coming week it would be most useful to attend. By 6 in the evening, Lavinia was dressed for Lady Stillingfleet's in a dove-coloured silk which was not, even by Hester's standards, designed to be noticed in a crowded room, and which was, by Lavinia's standards, the precise garment in which to do the evening's work. Lord Beresford kept a small house off Brook Street, which he had inherited from a great-aunt, and which he had not, in the 4 years since the inheritance, sufficiently remodelled to make it his own. The drawing-room was still her drawing-room. The miniatures on the mantel were still her miniatures. 3 boys and a girl, all of whom had been lost before Beresford had been born. And Beresford had not been able, in 4 years, to bring himself to take them down. Lavinia knew this, because her godmother knew this, and her godmother had told her, on the 3rd morning of May, over chocolate, in the offhand manner of a woman who had been waiting for a moment in which to deploy a piece of information of which she had been the only custodian for some weeks. "He kept them up," Hester said. She was peeling an orange with the slow patience of a woman whose hands had not, since the first frost, been entirely warm. "4 little lost Beresfords. He told my late husband once, he was 19, he had had 3 glasses, my husband used to say he had got the truth out of him at the bottom of the 3rd, that he could not put them down, because he had been told as a child that the 4 of them had had so much character that there had been none left for him. That is a terrible thing to tell a child. It is the kind of terrible thing his mother said. Hester set down the orange. She is gone now. He is very fond of his great-aunt's miniatures of her lost siblings. He puts a candle in front of them on the anniversary of her death, which was the 17th of January, which falls, child, within the 3rd week of January each year. He cannot, I should think, sit at a card table on the 17th of January, in his great-aunt's house, in front of his great-aunt's miniatures, with a candle, and cheat the brother of a country gentleman of £28,000. I do not believe a man who lights such a candle is capable of it. I have told you this, because I think you are about to decide that the third of the three, is Lord Beresford. I am telling you to wait. Godmother, wait. Hester picked up her chocolate. I am very old. I have been wrong about men 3 times, and right about them perhaps 11. And I am right about Lord Beresford. He is not your man. The cheats are the other 2. You are telling me this, Lavinia said. And you are telling me to wait. I am telling you, Hester said, to attend Lady Stillingfleet's musical evening tonight, because Vance and Reed will both be present, and to be very quiet in the music room when the Mozart begins, because in my experience, the man who cheats at cards in January will, by the 2nd week of May, have begun to relax. The musical evening at Lady Stillingfleet's was a small thing, of 40 people in a long, narrow room with a forte piano at one end. Lavinia sat in the 3rd row of chairs, with her godmother on her right, and Beresford himself, by what appeared to be coincidence, but was not, on her left. He had brought her godmother a small posy of violets in the hall. He had brought Lavinia nothing, which she understood after only a moment was the politest of all the possible courtesies. She watched, through the Mozart, the back of Sir Hadrian's head, 2 rows in front of her. She watched the line of his shoulder change angle when the music shifted key. She watched, on her other side, Beresford close his eyes through a passage of slow strings, as though he had not slept properly in several days. She watched, when the Mozart ended, and the room turned to talk among itself in low waves, Sir Hadrian and Lord Justin Reed speak to each other for 90 seconds in the doorway of an adjoining card room. They thought they were not being looked at. Reed put his hand on Vance's elbow. Vance leaned in. Reed said something brief behind his glove. Vance laughed, once, low, and the laugh faded on his face in the precise way the laugh of a man who has just been reminded of an old joint operation fades before he has time to school it. She turned her head a 1/4 inch. Lord Beresford was watching her watch them. His pale eyes, in the candlelight of Lady Stillingfleet's chandelier, were not unfriendly. He inclined his head very slightly, as though to confirm she had now seen what he had spent the spring waiting for someone else to see, and looked away. Godmother, Lavinia said on the carriage ride home. Yes. It is the other 2. Yes, child. And he, Wexford, has known since February. He has. And he has waited. He has. For what, Godmother? Hester reached across the carriage and took her goddaughter's hand. Her grip was warm and dry, and bony as a small bird's foot. For you, I should think, she said, though he would not have phrased it so. He would have said, for a stupidity from the 2 of them, which would make the thing public without his having to. He has been waiting 3 months for a stupidity that has not arrived. You are the stupidity, child. He did not know he was waiting for you. He knows now. Vauxhall, on the 2nd Saturday of May, was, the Duke said as he handed her down from the boat, the only place in London at which a man could safely be observed walking alone with a woman who was not his wife, on the principle that everyone present had brought someone they ought not to be walking with, and a duke and a country gentleman's daughter were too innocuous to occupy the attention of anyone who was not Lady Hester's goddaughter or the Duke of Wexford. He had reasoned through this in the half-hour journey upriver from the Whitehall stairs. She had let him reason. She had watched the lights on the water and counted, on the inside of her glove, the days. Saturday was the 10th. 4 to go. The gravel walks were lit with oil lamps the colour of weak honey. Music from the orchestra in the supper rotunda came in patches across the lawn. A fragment of a country dance, the hush of a long phrase from a wind instrument, a singer's vowel held too long. Couples passed them. Some bowed, some did not. Hester had retired to one of the supper boxes with 2 old friends and a cold pheasant, and had been very plain in handing the vinea over to the Duke at the foot of the boat stairs, that her goddaughter was to be returned not later than 11:30. They walked in silence for some minutes. "Miss Marlowe, Your Grace, I have been on the river for the entirety of this evening considering, very carefully, what I should and should not say to you between the boat stairs and Lady Hester's pheasant. I have concluded that I should say 2 things, and no more. The first is short, the second is longer. You will, I hope, hear me through both before responding to either." "Yes." "The first is—" He had not looked at her for the full sentence. He looked at her now. "That I have lost the wager." She did not stop walking. She could not entirely manage to lose her step. She felt the gravel through her slipper. She felt the Duke's gloved hand, which had been at her elbow for the navigation of the boat stairs, and had not, since, been removed. "You have lost it tonight." "I lost it," the Duke said, "on the Friday at the Pembroke ball, when I caught you on a missed step and held your hand a beat longer than the figure required. I knew it as I did it. I have, since then, conducted my affairs in such a way as to make the loss as quiet as I can make it. I have not yet informed Beresford and Vance and Reed. I shall do so tomorrow morning, at White's, at 11, in the presence of the steward and the betting book. I shall pay each of them their £1,000. I shall apologize to them for having proposed the wager. I shall, in the same conversation, accuse Vance and Reed of the matter of the 17th of January, in front of the steward, on the basis of evidence I have collected. I shall give them until the Friday of next week to leave the country. If they do not, I shall lay the matter before the magistrate at Bow Street. That is the first thing." She had stopped walking. She did not remember stopping. "And the second thing?" "The second thing," the Duke said, "is that I do not, having now lost it, expect you to find me changed by the losing. I have, by means of this wager, been a worse man than I should otherwise have been. I have, in the conduct of it, also been a slightly better one than I am at most other times. You should not weigh either, Miss Marlowe, when you weigh whether you wish me to call upon you in the morning. You should weigh only this. I am a man who, since the age of 13, has organized his entire life around the avoidance of an outcome I observed in my own father. And I have, in the 14 days since Lady Hester's dinner, given that organization up. Not as a matter of policy, which can be reversed by next Tuesday, but as a matter of body and bone, which cannot be reversed at all. I do not, having said that aloud, expect anything from you. I am telling you because you ask me, at the Pembroke ball, what I should tell you on a particular evening that I should recognize when I came to it. This is the evening. Now, by your leave, we shall go and find your godmother's pheasant, because I do not intend to embarrass either of us by saying anything more." She had her hand on his sleeve. She had not been aware of putting it there. The wool of his coat was cold from the river, and warm where her palm had been pressing it for the last several seconds. There was an oil lamp behind his shoulder, and the light was the same weak honey as every other lamp on the walk. But on his face it looked, she thought, like the slate had been wet a long time, and was at last beginning to dry. "Your Grace." "Yes." "You will not, in the next hour, kiss me at Vauxhall." "I will not." "You will pay your friends tomorrow morning at White's, and you will accuse 2 of them of cheating my brother, and you will come to Bruton Street in the afternoon, and you will sit in my godmother's morning room, and you will, on Hester's express invitation, call upon me there, and you will, at that point, ask me a question which we shall not, between this minute and that minute, have rehearsed. I will. And until tomorrow afternoon, the Duke said, we shall walk to your godmother's box, and we shall eat her pheasant, and you shall introduce me, should you wish to her 2 old friends as a man of whom you have a tolerable opinion. You are still very correct. I am still very correct. I have not, Miss Marlowe, in the last 6 months, been anything else. It is, she said, exhausting to watch. He looked at her. The grey was very wet. I am told, he said. They walked the rest of the way to the supper rotunda in step. He did not, in any visible particular, alter his bearing. His gloved hand was at her elbow, with the precise pressure it had had on the boat stairs. Anyone watching them, and there were perhaps 30 people on the walk who watched, and some who would write of it the following morning to country relatives, would have said, on oath, that the Duke of Wexford had escorted Lady Hester Pembroke's goddaughter from the river to the supper rotunda in a manner of grave indifference, and that Lady Hester's goddaughter had borne it with the composure of a young woman with a great deal yet to learn about ducal company. In her gloved hand, against his wool sleeve, Lavinia counted, 3 slow times, the bones of his wrist. The supper rotunda at Vauxhall, on a Saturday in the middle of May, was at once the loudest and the most private room in London. The orchestra in the gallery above played without rest. The candles in the great chandelier had been lit and changed twice that evening already, and the supper boxes around the perimeter were screened from one another by trellis work, through which one could see neighbouring boxes only as smudges of dress and waistcoat. Lady Hester had 2 old friends with her, a retired admiral whose hearing was poor, and a clergyman's widow whose hearing was excellent, and the 4 of them, with the Duke, took their seats around a table laid for the famous cold pheasant, and for a syllabub which had been, even Hester acknowledged, the only thing about Vauxhall in 2 decades to remain consistent. The Duke sat opposite Lavinia. He did not, for the duration of the supper, look at her with any expression that the Admiral's poor sight or the widow's excellent hearing could have catalogued. He spoke twice, once to the Admiral on the subject of the prevailing wind at Plymouth, and once to the widow on the question of a charity hospital in the city, of which he was a subscriber, and of which the widow's late husband had been chaplain. He drank 1 glass of hock. He ate sparingly. He laid his napkin on his thigh and did not at any point allow it to fall. He behaved, in short, as he had behaved at Lady Hester's small dinner 3 weeks earlier, with the difference, visible only to 2 persons in the rotunda, that the corner of his mouth, twice in the hour, did the brief thing it had done at the dinner table, and that on both occasions, the cause was a remark of Lavinia's so small and so unspecific that the Admiral did not note it, and the widow ascribed it to her own brilliant company. When the half-hour bell rang at 11:20, Hester rose, took the Admiral's arm, took her own friend's, and announced that she was returning by boat, that her goddaughter would be returned by carriage by the Duke at not later than midnight, that the matter had been agreed in advance, and that anyone in the rotunda who wished to write to a country relative about the impropriety of it could go in front of her to the boat stairs, and explain to her in person why she did not have the right to dispose of her own goddaughter as she chose at the age of 63. No one in the rotunda chose to. The Admiral, the widow, and the Dowager went out together by a side path. The Duke and Lavinia remained at the table for some minutes after they had gone, or the orchestra above completed the slow movement of a piece neither of them had been listening to. He did not, at any point in the carriage from Vauxhall to Bruton Street, kiss her. He did not so much as remove his glove. He held her hand in his gloved one through the long, bumping turn at Vauxhall Bridge, and he held it in his bare one through the quiet strait of Belgravia. And he held it not at all, from the moment the carriage entered Bruton Street to the moment it set down at her godmother's door. He gave her his arm to the door. He gave her his hand at the step. He bowed. He turned. He walked back to the carriage without looking up. The footman shut the door of the house behind her with the careful, soft click that footmen use after midnight. She did not, that night, sleep. She lay above the green silk counterpane in her bedchamber, with the curtain half drawn, and watched the candle gutter, and watched the shadow it threw on the ceiling, which moved as the wind moved against the window. And she did not, in the small hours, find it possible to think coherently about her brother. She thought instead about the Duke. She thought about him in fragments. She thought about the ink stain at his cuff at her godmother's dinner table. She thought about his hand on the betting book. She had not seen it, but she could imagine it, broad, the broken knuckle. She thought about him at Hyde Park, riding even, asking nothing. She thought, finally, about the fact that he had told her about the wager only after he had already lost it, which was perhaps the single most precise act of restraint she had ever encountered in another human being. In the morning she went down at 8:30. Hester was already at her chocolate. "Godmother." "Yes?" "He has lost the wager." "Yes, child." "You knew?" "I have known since the Pembroke ball. He was not as careful with the catch as he thought he was. I am 63. I have spent 45 years in the perimeter of ballrooms. I know what a man looks like at the precise instant he has begun to feel something he will not survive feeling. He looked at you across that step, like a man falling from a window." Lavinia sat. She did not move toward the chocolate. "He is going to White's at 11. "He is." "He is going to accuse Vance and Reed in front of the steward." "He is." "He will be challenged." "He will." Hester set down her cup. Her hand was very steady. "Vance fences well. Reed fences badly. Vance has fought twice and spared both opponents. He is not, in fact, the kind of man who fights to draw a final breath out of another. He is the kind of man who fights to look serious, and then has the matter settled by his second over breakfast. We shall see, child, by tomorrow morning's papers, whether your Duke is still in possession of his right shoulder." "Godmother." "Drink the chocolate, child. There is nothing whatever you can do between now and 11, and you will be insufferable to all of us if you have not been fed." Lavinia drank the chocolate. She did not taste it. At 9:15, she went up and dressed, in her own choice for the first time that month. A plain morning gown of dove-grey muslin, the colour of nothing at all. And she went down again to the morning room with her father's old prayer book in her lap, and her hands quiet on its cover. And she sat at the window for an hour and a half, without moving. At 12:30, a footman came up the stair, fast enough to have run from the corner. He brought a card. The card said only, "Wexford." Beneath the printed name in pencil, "I am unharmed. I am at the door. I shall come up only at your express invitation." The pencil was the Duke's writing. The downstroke of the W bisected a small dark stain that had not, before he wrote, been there. "Send him up," Lavinia said. She did not look at Hester, who had come into the morning room behind her. "Godmother, you will not, I think, remain." "I shall not." Hester gathered her shawl. She paused at the door. "Child." "Yes?" "Marry him this afternoon if you like. I shall not, for the rest of my life, ask you what you decided." She went out. The Duke came up the stair. His coat was the colour of slate, his cravat was creased on one side, and there was a small cut at his cheekbone. Not deep, the kind a sword-point at full extension makes when the sword has been turned at the last instant by a man who did not intend, even then, a final stroke. He stopped in the doorway. He did not, for a moment, come in. "Miss Marlowe." "Your Grace." "I have paid my £1,000. I have accused Sir Hadrian and Lord Justin in the presence of the steward and 3 other members of the club. They have until Friday to leave the country. They will leave. Vance, before leaving, requested the satisfaction of the matter on Wimbledon Common at 7 this morning. He missed. I missed also, on purpose. Honour is, by the metric the rest of London uses, satisfied. Reed did not appear. Beresford was my second. He is, at this moment, breakfasting with my mother in Berkeley Square, where he has chosen to confess to her certain other matters in which he was not personally implicated, but in which he should have intervened, and from which he has, since approximately the 18th of February, been attempting to extract himself. He is the better man of the four of us. He always has been. I should like, in this room, to be the next best. May I come in? She had risen, somewhere in the recitation, without her own permission. She had walked the 4 paces from the window to the door, without her own permission. She had her hand at his cravat, where the crease was, and was straightening it without her own permission. And her hand was, she discovered, shaking. Come in. He came in. He did not, until she put her hand against his cheek where the cut was, take his eyes from her face. He did not, when she put her hand there, lean into it. He stood with the discipline of 14 years of not leaning, which broke in a single breath, 3 seconds after her palm settled. The line of his shoulder dropped a 1/4 inch. He brought up his own hand and put it over hers, and kept her hand where it was, with the cut between them. Miss Marlowe. You will not call me Miss Marlowe. I will call you, the Duke said. Anything you tell me to. Lavinia. Lavinia. I should like you to know, she said, and she felt the fox seal of her brother's letter against her bodice through the dove-grey muslin, and was, for the first time in 3 months, not aware of it as a weight. That on the 3rd week of January, when my brother was cheated of £28,000, and ran for the coast, and wrote me from a chandler's room in Honfleur, I made an oath at our father's grave that I should not consider myself a person of any moral standing whatsoever until I had identified the men who had done it. I have, this fortnight, identified them. You have helped me do it. I have, this fortnight, also identified you. You have not helped me do that. I have done it on my own. Yes. And I have decided, on my own, that I should like to call you Alistair, in this room, before my godmother comes back and is intolerable about it. Alistair, Alistair. He did not kiss her. He had, in the 7 minutes since he had come into the room, become a man for whom not kissing her was the precise opposite of what he had previously not done. He held her hand against the cut at his cheekbone. He looked at her face. He said, at the volume of a man speaking in a confessional, I shall not, until you say to do so, kiss you. I shall, when you say to do so, ask your godmother for permission to address you formally on the question of marriage, in this room, at 6 this evening, with a witness if she requires one. I shall, between this minute and that minute, behave so correctly that even Lady Hester will be obliged to find me dull. Lavinia. Yes? Say to do so. She looked at the cut. She looked at the slate of his eye, the slate at last entirely wet. She looked at his mouth, which had, somewhere between the boat stairs at Vauxhall and the door of her godmother's morning room, stopped being the line it had been at her godmother's dinner table. She did not, immediately, say anything. Alistair. Yes. It is the 14th day. I know. You will not, before you kiss me, write anything in any book at any club. I shall not. I have not, in fact, owned a betting book of my own since I was 23. Then kiss me. He kissed her in her godmother's morning room. He kissed her slowly, with the precision of a man who had done very little of the work in advance and was working it out as he went. She had her hand at his cheek over the cut and felt the warmth of him through her glove and did not, for the moment, mind. The fortnight ended in her godmother's morning room at 12 minutes past 1 in the afternoon of the 11th of May, in the year of our Lord 1823. The 14th day, exactly, since the Duke had set his palm flat on the open page at White's, and Lady Hester Pembroke heard it end from the corridor outside, and went back down the stairs without making a sound, the silk of her skirt whispering against the banister. and instructed Hobbs, in the hall, to admit no one to the house for the remainder of the afternoon. The matter of Sir Hadrian Vance and Lord Justin Reed, which the newspapers learned of on the Wednesday and discussed on the Thursday and exhausted on the Saturday, did not greatly trouble the Duke of Wexford's London. The two gentlemen were said to have departed in haste for the Low Countries on private business. The proprietor of Brooks's was very quietly thanked for his discretion. The steward who had given the deposition was very quietly relieved of any threat of dismissal, and very quietly raised in salary. A small subscription was made up among certain members of White's for the benefit of a young gentleman recently returned from France, and the young gentleman's father's library, a small but distinguished collection of mathematical correspondence, which had been on the point of being sold, was preserved. Thomas Marlowe, who had been writing for 3 months from a chandler's room in Honfleur, came home on the second packet of the second week of May, before the wedding, with a single travelling case and a letter from his Bordeaux employer promising him work whenever he should choose to take it up. He stood on the deck of the boat at Dover and shaved for the first time in 5 days, and discovered, when he reached the inn, that the innkeeper's wife had already heard the matter from the post-rider, and that the innkeeper's wife was related to a lady's maid in Berkeley Square, and that nothing in the world remained private about anything. He came up to London the same evening. He found his sister at Lady Hester's, in the morning room where most things in her life had recently occurred, with her godmother and the Duke of Wexford, and a low fire and a great deal of light. He came in. He set down his bag. He looked at the Duke first, because he had been informed of the Duke by the innkeeper's wife and was prepared to be wary of him. And the Duke, who had risen when the door opened, walked the 4 paces of the morning room without hurry, and stopped at the precise distance which permitted Thomas Marlowe to extend his hand or to refuse it. "Mr. Marlowe, Your Grace." "I shall," the Duke said, "marry your sister at St. James's a week tomorrow. You may, if you wish, take it as an affront that the matter was not first put to you for your permission. I shall, in that case, apologize on the only ground I can, that I did not, in fact, propose to her. She proposed to me. I have, in the matter, been carried along by the energy of a more determined party, with the encouragement of your godmother, and the resigned consent of my own mother, who has remarked that she did not expect to live to see me brought to it, but is grateful to have done so. I should like, if it is at all possible, to ask your forgiveness for not having waited." Thomas Marlowe looked at the Duke. He looked at his sister. He looked at his godmother, who was watching him with the smallest possible amusement. "You proposed to him?" "I proposed to him," Lavinia said. "He was, at the time, bleeding." "He was bleeding?" "From a duel he fought at 7 that morning, on my account, with the man who cheated you on the 17th of January, the consequences of which the Duke had already prepared and discharged before he came up the stair." "On the 17th of January? The consequences of which—" "You may take it slowly, dear," Lady Hester said. "It is, on the whole, a great deal of news for a young man newly off a boat. Sit down, Thomas. Hobbs will bring you tea. Your sister, in the meantime, is the future Duchess of Wexford. Your good name is restored, your father's library is paid for, the 2 scoundrels are in Antwerp, and your godmother's morning room has not been so cheerful since the spring of '78. Do not, dear, look as though you have lost something." Thomas Marlowe sat. He sat heavily. He took his tea. He drank it. After a long minute, he set the cup down and looked at his sister, and made, through the work of his throat, a small, dry sound, which was not, until he was a quarter of the way through it, a laugh, and at which point it became the kind of laugh men make when they have not, for 14 weeks, properly laughed. "Lavinia." "Yes?" "In the matter of having ignored my letter, I should not, dear, look at me in that fashion. I ignored it on the morning I received it. I have been ignoring it for 15 days. "Then I shall," Thomas said, "in future, not write letters. They are clearly not effective. Your Grace." "Yes." You will, Thomas said, look after her. I will, I think, have had enough of looking after her by Christmas. You will have had enough of it, the Duke said, by Thursday. She has, in the fortnight in which I have known her, looked after rather more of me than I have of her. I do not anticipate the imbalance correcting. Then we are, Thomas said, well enough situated. Forgive me. I have not slept properly since February. I should like, if it is permitted, to embrace my sister briefly, and to go upstairs to whatever room my godmother has prepared for me, and to sleep for 3 days. Your Grace. Mr. Marlowe, you did this. I did some of it. You did the greater part of it. I did, the Duke said. The smaller part of it. The greater part of it was done in this room by your godmother and your sister. I provided certain information at certain moments. I provided, on the morning of the matter, a single absurd action with a sword. The rest of it has been done by women who, in my experience, are not generally given sufficient credit for the doing. Then I shall, Thomas said, give it to them. He embraced his sister, briefly, exactly as he had said he would. He bowed to his godmother. He bowed to the Duke. He went upstairs. He slept, as it happened, only 1 full day, because by the morning of the 2nd day he was hungry, but the door of the room remained closed, and Hobbs brought trays up at intervals, and at no point did anyone in the house disturb him. In the morning room, after he had gone up, Lady Hester rang for fresh tea. Well, child. Well, godmother. He will, I think, recover. He will. And you, Hester said, will sit on this sofa with your husband-to-be for the remainder of this hour, and you will discuss with him, in my presence, the precise arrangements for the wedding at St. James's a week tomorrow. Because his mother has written me 3 notes already this morning, each one shorter and more agitated than the last, and I should like, when I write to her at 3 o'clock, to be able to tell her that the matter is now in the hands of competent persons. The Duke sat on the sofa with Lavinia. He took her hand in both of his. He held it as though it were a thing he had been intending for 14 years to be given, and had at last received, and intended now to consider it slowly. He looked at her godmother. Lady Hester. Yes, Wexford. I shall, for the remainder of this hour, do exactly as you instruct. You will, Hester said. You will also for the remainder of your life. It is the simplest arrangement, and we shall make of it what we can. Tea, Hobbs, the good Bohea. We have, she said, settling into her chair, earned it. They were married at St. James's at 11 on the morning of the 21st of May, on the last Wednesday of the season, in the presence of the Duke of Wexford's mother, who wore lilac and wept twice, and of Lady Hester Pembroke, who wore lavender and did not, and of Lord Beresford, who stood at the Duke's elbow in the place of Sir Hadrian Vance, and of Thomas Marlowe, who gave his sister away in a coat which had been hastily let out across the shoulders. The bride wore not the emerald silk, and not the dove-grey muslin, but a gown of cream tabby, with a single thread of green at the cuff, which her godmother had ordered for her without asking, and which had been pronounced, on the morning of the wedding, the most perfectly correct dress any goddaughter of Hester Pembroke's had been married in 3 decades. Lavinia carried no flowers. She carried, in her left hand, a small green leather volume of Maria Edgeworth, which the Duke had given her in the bookshop at Piccadilly, and which she preferred, on the morning of her wedding, to anything floral. The breakfast at Berkeley Square was small. The Dowager Duchess of Wexford had insisted on it being small, on the principle that the Duke of Wexford had insisted on it being smaller, and the 2 of them had compromised on 22 persons, including the soup cook. Beresford gave the speech. Beresford had not, in the fortnight since the matter at White's, spoken to either Vance or Reed, both of whom were now in Antwerp, and he gave the kind of speech a man gives at the wedding of his oldest friend, when he has finally come to the conclusion that he is not, in fact, going to receive a similar piece of good fortune himself, and is content not to. He concluded the speech by reading aloud the entry from the betting book at White's, which he had purchased from the steward for a sum he refused to disclose, and which he presented, framed, to the bride, with the observation that the only thing on the page now worth £1,000 was the part where the Duke had signed his name, which she would, with luck, see signed again in the church registry at the close of the morning. He sat down to applause. The Duke did not rise to respond. The Duke's mother dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief which had been ironed twice that morning, and had to be ironed a third time before lunch. They left for Wexford Hall the same afternoon. Lavinia had changed, in the upstairs dressing room at Berkeley Square, out of the cream tabby and into a dark bronze travelling silk, a colour her new mother-in-law had chosen on the principle that bronze did not show road dust between Barnet and Watford, and the silk, when she sat down in the carriage and arranged it across her knees, made the small, dry whisper of new cloth that had not yet been worn through a single rain. The road north out of London was, at that hour, full of carts going the other way. Wednesday evening drays returning empty to their masters, a brewer's wagon smelling of hops and wet wood, a tinker's small donkey, a flock of geese being driven on foot towards Smithfield by a boy of about 11 who had taken his cap off when the Duke's carriage passed and put it back on at the wrong angle as soon as the carriage was past. The wheels rang on the cobbles, then softened to a steady thud as the road turned to packed dirt beyond the bar. Lavinia watched these things through the carriage window with the close attention of a woman who had, that morning, been married, and who was therefore unable to bear thinking about her own person for the next several hours. The glass was cool under her gloved fingertips. The leather of the bench was warm where the afternoon sun had been resting on it. The Duke sat opposite her. He had taken her hand at Marble Arch. He had not let it go since. He did not speak between the gate at Marble Arch and the change of horses at Barnet, and he did not speak again between Barnet and the long, quiet rise up to the chalk above Watford, where the carriage stopped at a small inn for the second change and a cold dinner. They arrived at Wexford Hall at the hour at which the long shadows of the lime avenue began to cross the gravel. The carriage drew up at the south front. The doors of the house stood open, and there were lamps in the inner hall, and on the steps, the Dowager Duchess's housekeeper, who had ridden ahead by post-chaise that morning to make sure the rooms were as the family liked them, stood with the housekeeper of Wexford Hall, both of them in their best black, both of them with their hands folded in front of them in the precise mirror image of one another. The new Duchess stepped down. She did not lean on her husband. She took the housekeeper's curtsy. She gave her name. She gave her bonnet to a footman. She walked into her own hall in a cream tabby gown which had been ordered without her consent on a Wednesday at the end of May, in a house in which she would, by Michaelmas, have changed approximately 27 small arrangements of furniture and 4 large arrangements of routine, and in which the housekeeper, by the second week of June, would have begun referring to her, entirely behind her back, as Her Grace, in the tone of a woman who had been waiting some years for a duchess who knew her own mind. The first week was very quiet. The Duke did not, until the Tuesday following, go into the estate office. The Duchess did not, until the Friday, write a single letter. They walked, in those days, around the lake at the south of the park. They sat on the bench at the head of the orchard. They read, in the long evenings, in the same room, in 2 armchairs drawn slightly closer to one another each evening than they had been the evening before. They were, by the second week of June, beginning to discover what the rest of their married life was likely to look like. It was, very specifically, what they had each, in their different ways, been preparing for since the second Saturday in May. It is October now, 6 months after the wedding, and 5 months after their arrival at Wexford Hall, and the orchard between the south terrace and the kitchen garden is at the precise point in its year at which it is more apple than leaf. The apples are the small, hard, late kind which keep best in cellars, and which the cook has been swearing at for a fortnight because she has not yet decided whether to bake them or to send half of them down to the village. The Duchess of Wexford, who is still, on most mornings, surprised to be the Duchess of Wexford, and who has decided to remain in this state of surprise indefinitely because she finds it useful, has gone out among the trees in a brown wool wrap with a basket on her hip, ostensibly to taste the apples and decide for the cook, and in practice, to walk for an hour by herself before the post arrives. The post arrives at 10:30. The post, today, contains a letter from Honfleur, though the letter is no longer from Honfleur, but from Bordeaux, from a wine merchant's office, in which her brother is now junior clerk, and the letter is the third in a series of letters which has been arriving every fortnight since June. The post also contains a letter from her godmother. Her godmother's letters are very brief, because her godmother is 63, and writes to her once a fortnight, only when there has been a particular item of social news that she could not, in good conscience, withhold. This morning's letter, when Lavinia opens it on the south terrace, with a basket of apples beside her, and her husband at the other end of the bench with a newspaper, reads in its entirety. Lord Beresford has married a great niece of mine you have not met. She is 27 and clever, and they will do very well. He has had his great-aunt's miniatures of the 4 lost Beresfords moved, at last, into a small back room, with the door kept shut. A thing he could not, for 4 years, bring himself to do, and which I think his new wife has accomplished, by the simple expedient of asking him kindly, in the soft voice she keeps for matters of consequence. Vance has come to a poor end, in a tavern in Antwerp, at the hand of a man whose name has not been recorded. Reed is said to have gone to America. I do not, child, regret the loss of either, although I should not put it in a letter you might read aloud at table. The dahlias have done badly this autumn. I am very tired of dahlias. Hester. Lavinia reads the letter twice. She folds it. She puts it into the pocket of the brown wool wrap. The Duke does not look up from the newspaper. He has been reading the same column for several minutes. He has not, in fact, been reading the column. He has been waiting for her to put down the letter, so that he can ask, without having to look up, whether her godmother is well. She is well. Good. Beresford has married a great niece I have not met. He told me on Tuesday. He has been very pleased about it. Sir Hadrian is gone, in a tavern in Antwerp. The Duke turns the page of the newspaper. He does not look up. Yes, I have known for some weeks. I did not, at first, wish to tell you, because I was uncertain whether you would consider it a thing to grieve, or a thing to mark with relief. And I did not, on consideration, wish to influence you in either direction. I had intended to tell you next week. Your godmother has saved me the trouble. Are you, on the question, he turns the next page, relieved or grieved? I am neither, Alistair. Then you are exactly what I had supposed you would be. She takes an apple out of the basket. She does not bite it. She sets it on the bench between them, halfway down, so that it rests on the painted wood at the point at which his thigh in the dark riding breech meets the empty space, and so that he must, to remain in possession of the newspaper, ignore it for some seconds. He ignores it for 2. He sets the newspaper down. He picks up the apple. He turns it between his fingers, the right hand, the one with the broken knuckle, and looks at her over it. Lavinia. Yes? This is the 3rd apple you have placed on this bench in 2 weeks. It is. I am settling, in my own time, certain ordinal points of motif consistency, which my reading of a particular author over the summer suggested I ought to. Eat the apple, Annister, or give it back to me. He bites it. He bites it neatly, at the place his thumb has been touching. He chews. He swallows. He looks at her with the slate-grey eye which is now, 6 months after the wedding, almost always wet, which is to say, almost always green at the edges, almost always lit from inside, and which she has, in those 6 months, learned to read in 14 distinct registers. It is a good apple, he says. It is. I selected it for the back of the orchard, where the wind has been on the trees longest and the fruit is hardest. The cook will not bake them. She will keep them in straw in the cellar through January. Through to the 3rd week of January? Yes. She does not look at him. She looks at the orchard. Through to the 3rd week of January, through which week, this year, my husband and I shall spend at home, in our own house, with our own fire, and we shall not, at any point, go up to London. We shall not. You will not be reading any books that contain mention of the 3rd week of January. I shall be reading, the Duke says, whichever books you place on the bench beside me, in whichever order you have decided to place them, and I shall eat whichever apples you have selected for me from the back of the orchard. I have, since the second Saturday in May of this year, made all my arrangements on the assumption that I should never again be required to make my own. She looks at him at last. The wind has lifted the dark of his hair against his forehead and laid it down again. The cut at his cheekbone has not, in 6 months, entirely vanished. There is a small white line which she has, in the last fortnight, taken to setting her thumb against in the mornings, before either of them is properly dressed, in the kind of motif callback which an audio listener, had there been one, would have caught at once. Alistair. Yes. You have not, in our entire marriage, written anything in any book at any club. I have not. Nor, Lavinia, shall I. I have never been a man for clubs. You are, she says, still very correct. I am told. She picks up the apple from his hand. She bites it on the opposite side from where he has bitten. She gives it back to him. He takes it. He sets it on the bench between them. They sit on the south terrace at Wexford Hall, in the autumn sun of a country day that has decided, at last, and after a great deal of indecision, that it is autumn, and the wind moves through the orchard, and the small, hard, late apples knock against one another in their leaves, and from the kitchen garden the cook can be heard, in the steady, exhausted voice of a woman who has been making a decision about apples for 14 days, telling her undercook to send the half of them down to the village by the cart at 3. And the Duke, on the bench, leans his shoulder by the precise width of a thumb against his wife's, and is correctly, irreparably, comprehensively at peace. The fortnight, after all, has lasted them 6 months. They both, by now, suspect it will manage rather longer. If you have stayed by the fire with us this far, and you must have to have heard the end of an autumn from a south terrace in Buckinghamshire, you will forgive me one last, quiet observation. Wagers in books at clubs are made by men who do not yet know what they are about to lose. The only kind of man who is safe from such a wager is the man who has already given the thing away, before he wrote his name on the page, and did not know he had. Tell me, in the comments below, the line in this story you should like to hear read once more on a winter night. Subscribe so the next fire is lit when you are ready to sit beside it. Until then, sleep well, and let the candle, if you like, burn a little longer than it ought to.